Hello there. Hello, everybody. Welcome to Poetry Hour Notes from the Field, our monthly reading series. And by reading, I mean our monthly lecture series led by me, Marcelo Hernandez Castillo, YubaSutter County Poet Laureate, and continuing in our tradition of using this space as a lecture series, kind of like the Brown Bag Lunches lecture series at UC Berkeley, though not to that prestige. But I'm seeing these lecture series as a way of instructing, as a way of giving people in our community a kind of instruction around poetry and contemporary American poetry that might be difficult to come by. In the spaces that poetry and the academy occupies. I mean, I teach in the academy, and these are poems that I care deeply about, that I'm going to continue thinking about, and I wanted to share these poems with you to continue to instill that poetry is very much alive. Today, I have the pleasure of talking about the poet Bridget Pekin Kelly. Let me just get this going. Bridget Pekin Kelly was a poet. She recently passed away not too long ago. I believe in 2016. Yeah, 2016. She passed away October 14th, 2016 in Urbana, Illinois. She taught at the University of Illinois at Urbana-Champaign, as well as, at a bunch of other places. She was known for her biggest, I guess, her two books are The Orchard, published by Boa Editions, and I'm sorry, The Orchard. Well, the Orchard is the book that I'm gonna kind of talk about. Sorry, I lost my place. No, I'm going to be talking about song. Sorry. But her awards included the Lamont Poetry Selection, The Orchard, published by Boa Editions, was also my publisher, was a finalist for the Pulitzer Prize in Poetry, the Los Angeles Times Book Award in Poetry, and the National Book Critics Circle Award in Poetry. About her work, Stephen Dobbins says, Bridget Pekin Kelly is one of the very best poets now writing in the United States. In fact, there is no one who is any better. Not only are her poems brilliantly made, but they also give great pleasure. Rarely are those two qualities seen together in one poet. So I have a poem of hers set up here. It's one of my favorite poems ever. It's called Song. And I guess the running theme about around today's lecture is imagism, imagery, and how that works its way through narrative. How one single image is carried across a very large landscape. And by landscape, I don't mean like geography, I mean the landscape of the poem. This is a very long poem. This is a very long poem with one single image at its center. And that image isn't like in the middle of the poem, but by center, I mean that this is the image around which everything points to, everything refers to. This is the image that constitutes change in the poem. Every line is somehow in relation to this image. And what is that image in particular? It is the image of a goat's head. Um, and a warning, maybe for kids who might be listening, this poem is has some graphic content. Um, uh, it deals with just a goat who was butchered, um, and his its head was uh, tied up on a tree, which is a really grisly, very um, dark image, right? But you'll see from the ending of this how this is a poem of being haunting, but also it ends with some kind of sweetness. You'll see what I mean. Um, but yeah, basically, imagery in imagery in a landscape of the poem. All right, let me switch over to cool. So this is from the Academy of American Poets website. Oh, you know what? Let me remove this banner so that way we can see the entirety and you can still kind of see me. All right. And apologies if we cannot see it too well. And in fact, what I'm going to do instead is I'm going to present, I'm going to share my screen. Yeah. That way it's a lot easier to see and read. All right. Window to screen. Bear with me 1 second while I video file. I'm just going to share my screen. All right, I'll just share my whole screen. How do I avoid this? That's not what I wanted. Stop sharing this. Okay. Man, you'd think by now I would have figured this out. Window. Okay. I think you can see it from here. Again, sorry about this. I think this is what you're able to see. Yes. No, it's okay. I think I'm just going to just continue like this. Sorry about that. So this is song. And the way I'm going to do this is stop halfway. So I'm not going to necessarily read the whole poem and then, but as we go along, I'm kind of going to kind of identify what is happening. Close reading this poem, right? Song. Listen. colon. Okay. So starting right off the bat, um, this is also mostly how I conduct my classes. The invocation to the reader of listen, followed by a colon, is an invitation that this isn't just written for the poet, but it's written for the reader specifically. The poet is inviting the reader. I want you to listen to what I have to say. And then, you know, it could have easily begun with there was a goat's head hanging by ropes in a tree. Um, but this word listen, um, has a particular function, especially because it's the first word. It's really kind of maybe, I mean, I see it as a tradition, an oratory tradition in which you are inviting people together. Um, and then we start off with the central image that I said. There was a goat's head hanging by ropes in a tree. Um, I always pay attention to Bridget Picking Kelly's use of nouns, and by nouns also images. Here in this line, we have a head, not just any head, but it's a goat's head, ropes, and tree. So very solid, very concrete, very like right off the bat, having fidelity towards the sacredness of the image, however violent it may be. All night it hung there and sang, and those who heard it felt a hurt in their hearts and thought they were hearing the song of a night bird. So in terms of narrative, if we're thinking, because this is a really long poem, and how to establish narrative, what is our beginning, what is our middle, what is our end, the traditional sense of establishing a narrative, the rising action, the conflict, if we're thinking of like the hero's journey. But here we already begin with after the fact, right? And as we read, we're going to see how it got there. But we skip steps A, B, C, and D pretty much in the narrative, and we're already getting to the end result of what is the effect of this object. And also, one of the important things around Kelly's work is uh, the mythical, myth being um, myth being entered in through the everyday. And this isn't like an everyday occurrence, but nonetheless, it is a thing of this world. It is a thing that exists in this world in a way that, like, something of mythic proportions is kind of straddling the divide between the celestial, the cosmic, the heavenly, um, all of that. So, you know, Kelly uses images to stand in for something, a symbolism that is much larger. So it's not just a goat's head, it's also guilt, and it's also a haunting. So this goat's head hung there and sang, and those who heard it felt a hurt in their hearts and thought they were hearing the song of a night bird. Why would hearing the song of a night bird bring hurt in your heart? It's counterintuitive. Wouldn't it necessarily bring joy? So that's kind of the first way that we're establishing a contradiction. They sat up in their beds, and then they lay back down again. In the night wind, the goat's head swayed back and forth, and from far off it shone faintly, the way the moonlight shone on the train track miles away, beside which the goat's headless body lay. And it continues some boys. Yeah, continuing with the central image. That first line, the goat's head hanging by ropes in a tree, is the central image by which everything jumps off from. Um, and the specificity of the image, the moonlight shining on the train track miles away, beside which the goat's headless body lay. Um, the specificity of observation, I think, is something important to note. Some boys had hacked its head off. It was harder work than they had imagined. The goat cried like a man and struggled hard, but they finished the job. They hung the bleeding head by the school and then ran off into the darkness that seems to hide everything. We talk about, I guess, symbolism a lot in poetry, and I tend to kind of like move away from that because of the subjectivity of symbolism and how it can kind of be a cop out for a less substantial reading of a text and just say like this head represents, like, that's not what I'm interested in, but I'm more interested in the semantic meaning behind what it means to do something and then have something like the darkness of a forest, the darkness of the far away to hide into, that it is possible to run away from something you have done and be hidden from it. And so the central premise of this poem is, can you actually really run away from that? If you have done something in your life which you regret, can you ever move away from that? Forgive yourself truly. Um, and not even that, but just, can it stay in the past truly, or will it live with you forever? And that's kind of the philosophical debate um, that Kelly is proposing here in this poem, as you'll see it develop, is, can we truly move on? Can we just ignore something that was done in the past and pretend it never happened? Can we continue to live our lives? So these boys, these these boys who did this cruel thing, they were teenagers, went off and hid into the darkness that seems to hide everything. So maybe it's not really true that the darkness hides everything, but that we kind of pretend that we can, if we're in the dark, out of sight, out of mind kind of thing. Continuing. The head hung in the tree. The body lay by the tracks. The head called to the body to the head. They missed each other. The missing grew large between them until it pulled the heart right out of the body, until the drawn heart flew toward the head, flew as a bird flies back to its cage and the familiar perch from which it trills. Kelly does this thing of personifying, anthropomorphizing an abstract idea by giving it, qualities of the physical. And here, it's the feeling of missing something that you have been separated from is an actual thing here, that it has, no pun intended, a body, that the missing grew large between them, to give it a shape. She gives shape to concepts. And here we have kind of the surreal nature of it. Like, we can see this existing in real life, right? The act of this can exist in real life. But then we begin to dive into the surrealist logic, the logic of surrealism that really asks us to suspend disbelief and trust, I guess, the logic of the poem, this unreason of the missing between the head and the body being so great that the heart in the body leaves the body and follows towards, one would suppose, the song that the head is singing. Again, sorry for the morbidity of this poem. Long poems have just been on my mind lately. Um, and I'm really interested in like how I've like recently I've been teaching about another poet, Larry Levis, but specifically how long poems are held together. And so here we're moving on. Then the heart sang in the head, softly at first, and then louder, sang long and low until the morning light came up over the school and over the tree, and then the singing stopped. Um, when I read a poem, I'm looking for connections. Again, not like symbolism, like what does the heart represent? Those are all kind of more obvious, but more so, what does it mean that, right? How do I experience this image? What does this image mean to me? And so, what does it mean that, to answer that question, what does it mean that people only heard the song of the goat once it was reunited with the heart? If we're thinking about like mind and body, um, you know, if we sing a song and it's more cerebral, are people more inclined to hear it, or does the heart need to be there in order to grasp it more fully? You're thinking of, and this is kind of like artists and singers who carry this idea of duende, which I can talk later, of this almost like magical power of reaching to the depths of the ground and really singing from the roots of your feet, singing from the roots of trees, singing from the dirt. And Kurt Cobain, Whitney Houston, all kind of were had this heart to them. um Freddie Mercury, they kind of all carried this intuitive intuitive nature. This the heart here, I guess, is like the feeling to the song. um it stopped. The goat had belonged to a small girl. She named the goat Broken Thorn Sweet Blackberry, named it after the night's bush of stars, because the goat's silky hair was dark as well water, because it had eyes like wild fruit. And again, image, 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 image. The name of the goat itself is Broken Thorn Sweet Blackberry. We'll come back to the word sweet. Because of its silky hair, the nouns, uh, was dark as well water. So describing a noun via another noun. And its eyes like wild fruit. The girl lived near a high railroad track. At night, she heard the trains passing, the sweet sound of the train's horn pouring softly over her bed. And each morning she woke to give the bleeding goat his pail of warm milk. She sang him songs about girls with ropes and cooks in boats. She brushed him with a stiff brush. She dreamed daily that he grew bigger, and he did. Um, so now we have, I guess, the narrative. Now we have the story of who this goat is, of who it belonged to, where it lived, and kind of the circumstances around the narrative. So the structure of this poem is, we have the idea first, given through images. We have this concept of if parts of you are separated from each other, and here, the metaphor is the goat, that the goat's longing to be reunited with itself as a wholeness, as a completeness, that we are continually trying to complete ourselves, make ourselves whole, which is why the heart walks, floats, whatever you may travels towards the head, and then the head begins singing. Um, and then we have the story. So easily, I guess this poem could have started um, uh, with after the singing stopped. The goat had belonged to a small girl. That could have been the beginning of the poem. Um, but I guess there's a difference if it would have begun with the narrative of the story and then led to the more abstract idea. I think beginning with the abstract idea, the concept, the surrealist image of this sets up the reader, sets up the expectations of what's to come. That as soon as you read that, you're like, okay, I know what I'm in for. This is going to be a wild and weird journey. So she dreamed daily that he grew bigger, and he did. She thought her dreaming made it so. But one night the girl didn't hear the train's horn. And the next morning she woke to an empty yard. The goat was gone. Everything looked strange. It was as if a storm had passed through while she slept. Wind and stones, rain stripping the branches of fruit. She knew that someone had stolen the goat and that he had come to harm. She called to him. All morning and into the afternoon she called and called. She walked and walked. In her chest, a bad feeling, like the feeling of the stones gouging the soft undersides of her bare feet. I guess what I continually tell my students is establishing patterns to break them. And so the structure that I had mentioned a little bit before of beginning with the concept, then going into the more narrative plot of the story of the little girl whose goat was stolen. Then she woke up. She knew something felt wrong. Things looked different. There is a consistency that we have for like 15 lines of telling us this story that is in a way that doesn't use a lot of figurative speech, that is kind of telling us the what. And then the pattern breaks suddenly, like the feeling of the stones gouging the soft undersides of her bare feet. That she is putting a name to the feeling that she has. And so suddenly there's a break of pattern. There's a break in the pattern of the narrative plot that is developing. And then suddenly we go back to this figurative, to this very bodily, corporeal way of thinking about this feeling that you have. Like, what does this feeling feel like? Not to be redundant there, but to her, it's this feeling feels like the soft undersides, um, the stones gouging the soft undersides of her bare feet. Then somebody found the goat's body by the high tracks. The flies already filling their soft bottles at the goat's torn neck. Then somebody found the head hanging in a tree by the school. They hurried to take these things away so that the girl would not see them. They hurried to raise money to buy the girl another goat. They hurried to find the boys who had done this, to hear them say it was a joke, a joke. It was nothing but a joke. And here we have another, like a shift with, but listen, here is the point. We have two instances of, listen, I want you to focus. I want you to now slow down. I've been telling you this story, you know, um, that uses things like then, then somebody found the head, they hurried, taking these things away, they hurried, and then raising to find the boys. So all these words that indicate transitions, that indicate forward momentum, and then we suddenly stop. But listen. And this is the poet speaking directly to the reader. This is the point I want to make. And very rarely do you see this happening in poems, because that's kind of what I guess we as instructors of poetry usually suggest students not do is the quote unquote like show don't tell, which has a lot of problems to that, and that's another conversation for another day. But you would expect that if you didn't have this, but listen, here's the point, that it should be evident from the line that this is the line that's going to give the point. You shouldn't have to say like, but listen, here's the point. Bridget Begin Kelly, I think, follows her intuition. And she says, no, this is important enough that I need to speak to the reader directly. Here is the point. And what is that point? The boys thought to have their fun and be done with it. Period. That's the point. The point is some people think that they can do some cruelty and be done with it. That if they don't have a conscience, even if they don't have a conscience, that they are so callous that they can do this and then the next instance go have, their breakfast. The key word is thought. What Kelly proposes is that in reality, nobody really can just move on like that. The boys thought to have their fun and be done with it. It was harder work than they had imagined, this silly sacrifice, but they finished the job, whistling as they washed their large hands in the dark. What they didn't know was that the goat's head was already singing behind them in the tree. And the singing, I think, is reminiscent of like A Telltale Heart. Is that the one? Is it Poe? Yeah, it's Poe. The one where the beating heart is underneath the floorboards, and it's really like the person, I forget his name, his consciousness beating louder and louder, and it's thrumming in its head so loud that it kind of drowns out all of the noise. And as soon as this event happened, this song, the goat song, started overtaking their mind, their consciousness. They thought they could do this and be done with it. It's not as easy as that. It's not as what they imagined. It was harder work. What they didn't know was that the goat's head would go on singing just for them long after the ropes were down, and that they would learn to listen, pail after pail, stroke after patient stroke. So there's that saying, the axe forgets, but the tree remembers. This might be recorded in the town's documents. It might be even, turned into a book or a poem or a movie. But nonetheless, it is the people to whom this happened that this will stay with them forever. It will live and bury its head in their head and fester there. And I think we all have some of this, right? We all try to accept and let things go and move on from the past and forgive, make amends, so on and so forth. But I think, this is like the wisdom of poets. This is like the scenario, the situation that is being proposed here. And what she is stating is that, I don't know if she's giving an answer yet. We'll keep reading for that. Is there an answer to this? Can you ever move on? Right? That's the dilemma. And for those of you writing poems, like thinking about what is the dilemma at the center of my poem? So not only will it go on singing, but they're going to learn how to listen to the singing. That it's going to continue into the future, but that they're going to grow in a way that they perceive the singing differently. Maybe you can never get rid of that consciousness of that guilt, but you understand it in a different way. You understand it in a way that, like, maybe had that not happened, this had not happened. maybe you would still be that person who thought they could do this and brush it off. You no longer are that person, right? Maybe it's still in your head, but as a memory that you know changed you, right? Maybe you became a better person after this. They would wake in the night thinking they heard the wind in the trees or a night bird, but their hearts beating harder, or a night bird, but their hearts beating harder, wherever. They would wake in the night thinking they heard the wind in the trees or a night bird, but their hearts beating harder. There would be a whistle, a hum, a high murmur, and at last, a song. The low song a lost boy sings, remembering his mother's call. Not a cruel song. No, no, not cruel at all. This song is sweet. It is sweet. The heart dies of this sweetness. This is probably one of the best endings. It's arguably one of the best poems, in of the last 50 years. Um, but certainly is one of my favorite endings. This song, you know, now we're likening it to the low song a lost boy sings, remembering his mother's call. That we are no longer that child who lived in innocence. That these kids have grown up and known that they know they have lost something. And all you have is the memory of your mother's call. All you have is the memory that life could have been different. And there's other ways to interpret this. It's just how I interpret it. But the flip, how Kelly flips this on its head is that throughout this entire poem, it's been a cruel song. It's been a haunting. It's been kind of like a hammering on their heads, in which they would do anything to make it stop. It's a pain. It's a hurt, right? From the first few lines, they felt the hurt in their hearts and thought they were hearing the song of a night bird. But at the end, it's not a cruel song. No, no, not cruel at all. This song is sweet. It is sweet. The heart dies of this sweetness. I don't know what to make of that final line, that final words. The heart dies of this sweetness. The only way that I can explain it is maybe by a song from I'm not gonna find it. George, George. Yes, I have her here. George Jones. He stopped loving her today. And if you don't know this song, I would love to. Let me see if I can present. No. And I don't know if you can hear it if I play the song, so I'm just not going to play it. So, but just to summarize, this man loved this woman so much that he suffered when she left him, or when they were no longer together, for whatever reasons. I think it's unclear, but he there's a line like he underlined in red every "I love you" in every letter she ever sent him, and so it was his obsession. He kind of lost his mind. It was a cruel song that was in his head. The day he died was the only day he was happy, his friends said. They saw him with a smile for the first time since they had known him. Why? Because he no longer had to suffer in a world without the person he loved. um, that that was the only way to be rid of this suffering. And is that sweetness? That the only way to escape, or not that, but the that that's probably actually a bad comparison. Um, but I think where I'm going is that you know things change. We might still remember that song, something that you know we regret, but that over time it's not going to stay bitter. It's the same song, but it's a sweet song. It's sweet because again, it changed us. You know, we are better for the adversity that we go through. Um, and we see the world differently. We see the world in technicolor. We wake up and smell the roses. Um, and the heart dies of this sweetness. And that I guess it's possible to live in peace, that we can be fulfilled by this sweetness. Um, so that is Bridget Pegeen Kelly's poem song, this epic, poem, even though it's not an epic, but it feels enormous. Um, and I hope you look her up, check out her work. I believe her books are still available through BOA Editions and in print. But there's a bunch of stuff that you can find online about her. But yeah, this is a great poem, and in Poetry in the Field, this is kind of a classic that I would hope my students in my MFA classrooms come across this poem at least once in their life. So I share it with anybody I get the chance to share it with. Thank you so much. Today was a little bit longer of a lecture. Apologies for that. But yeah, thank you for bearing with me with a few technical difficulties, and stay tuned for next month. All right. Bye.